This is Yuki. I'm a senior analyst on the Business Intelligence and Data Strategy team at HPD. And I'm here today with my colleague Habiba, who is a Deputy Director of Performance Management and Reporting. We're both from the Analytics Division at HPD, and as you can tell from our titles, we work closely with data every day, and my team specifically is HPD's Open Data Team. We're so excited to present our open data sets and engage with you all today, and I hope that you leave today's session with a better understanding of our agency and open data sets, especially our affordable housing production. This is our agenda for today. We are going to start with an introduction to HPD, and we will go into a really brief overview of HPD's open data sets. Our focus today is to deep dive into our affordable housing production datasets, which Habiba is going to present. And before we begin, I want to note that the chat will be monitored by my team, Maggie and Jess, and we will be able to address your questions during the Q&A section at the end. And it looks like we have a lot of people joining us from lots of different places, from what I can see. Thank you so much for sharing. And again, please feel free to leave comments and questions. So first, we're going to start with the introduction to HPD. So as many of you might already know, New York City government as a whole is a large and complicated organization consisting of more than 70 agencies. HPD reports to the Chief Housing Officer, currently served by Jessica Katz, and we work adjacent to other housing-related entities like New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, and Housing Development Corporation, known as HDC. Our agency's mission is to promote both quality and affordability of New York City's residential housing. We strive to, 1, maintain safety and health of buildings and residents. 2, create and support various mechanisms that ensure housing affordability. And 3, engage New Yorkers to enhance neighborhood strength and diversity. HPD is currently led by Commissioner Adolfo Carrion Jr. and consists of more than 50 divisions tasked with many different functions. We have more than 2,200 full-time active staff as of January of this year. Looking at fiscal year 2024, our expense budget, which is used to keep the lights on, is over $900 million. And to clarify expense budget, generally speaking, funds city government services, including the salaries of government employees, utilities, contracts, and other routine operating expenses. So it is the expense budget that people generally think of as the city budget. Our capital budget is $1.4 billion. And again, to clarify what capital budget means, it is a separate budget covering one fiscal year, funding physical infrastructure used either in support of government operations, such as low-interest loans for the creation or preservation of affordable housing for HPD's case, or for general public use, like building roads, bridges, libraries, and parks. And for the HPD's budget, please note that both of the numbers for budget, expense, and capital exclude pass-through funding that HPD will not control. So what do we do? Like many other agencies, we have multiple functions, and it is impossible to cover every detail of what we do today, but here are the 5 main functions. First is affordable housing production, which you will hear more about later in the presentation. Second, we do asset and property management, which includes direct management of small amount of land and buildings still owned by HPD, but it's mostly oversight and monitoring for the thousands of privately owned affordable housing properties that HPD has invested in over the years. And this includes general homeownership and rental housing, as well as Mitchell Lama Properties and HTFC Co-ops, which stands for Housing Development Fund Corporation Corporatives. Third, we also offer rental subsidies and ensure people are placed in affordable housing efficiently and equitably. So for example, HPD's Housing Connect is an online portal where people can apply for affordable housing lotteries. We also work to increase the supply of housing designed to address homelessness and to quickly move those experiencing homelessness out of shelter into affordable housing. Fourth, our code enforcement might be where the public interacts with us the most. We enforce the housing maintenance code by conducting inspections and responding to housing-related complaints filed through 311. For example, tenants may call 311 for heat or hot water issues, mold, pests, or other housing and safety concerns. We issue violations and also manage various housing quality enforcement programs like the 7A program, alternative enforcement program, and emergency repair program. And finally, community planning and engagement includes direct engagement with tenants and owners about housing resources, pre-development planning for city-owned sites, and neighborhood planning efforts in collaboration with communities to meet broader needs. And of course, there are other functions like housing policy research and other in-house functions like tech, legal affairs, and external affairs like any other agencies. So if you're interested in learning more about HPD's functions and programs, please check. So let's get into more about our open datasets. We can say that there are 4 categories of open data we publish and maintain. The first category is housing development, which you will hear more about from Habiba. Another major category is the housing maintenance code enforcement data, such as complaints and violations dataset derived from 311. We have other open data, such as monthly shelter census and maps that are available online, which includes affordable housing production map, inclusionary housing sites map, and Equitable Development Data Explorer, which HPD helped create alongside the department. Our open datasets are used in a couple of different ways. For internal usage, open data are used to create dashboards and to respond to data inquiries, which improve our operational efficiency. We use these data for analytics and research purposes, and they inform our internal projects and policy research. For external usage, we have many institutions, companies, housing-related organizations, and academic research centers who use our data to track and monitor the state of affordable housing or the quality of New York City housing. Our open datasets also provide journalists and reporters with housing data, which enables data-driven storytelling. So now I'm going to pass it to Habiba, who will talk more about affordable housing.
Thank you so much, Yuki. We here at HPD look to address the housing crisis we face in our city through many strategies, including by financing the new construction and preservation of housing that is affordable, that is decent, and that is safe for New Yorkers. I'll offer 2 ways that we do this. One is we do this by providing subsidies in the form of loans through our various development programs. 2, we provide tax incentives that offset costs for the construction of new affordable housing or the preservation of existing housing, whether that housing needs to be rehabbed or not. And in exchange for these benefits, the city spurs the creation of housing that is affordable to New Yorkers at different income tiers. To determine housing affordability, HPD uses something called AMI, or Area Median Income. This AMI is calculated and released every year by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. HUD uses the median household income of an area as a benchmark to calculate AMI based on household income and household size. Using AMI, the New York City region, which obviously includes all 5 boroughs, along with Westchester, Putnam, and Rockland counties. So for the New York City region, New York City sets the rents for affordable housing based on household income and household size. And with this as a guideline, a low-income family of 3 in New York City making roughly about $60,000 a year would be able to afford a rent of about $1,500. And a middle income family of 3 making about $144,000 a year would be able to afford a rent of about $3,600. And you'll see this a little bit later when we start looking at the data, that while most of our housing serves low-income New Yorkers, we also serve middle-income New Yorkers like teachers, like firefighters, and other service professionals who are critical to making. HPD publishes an affordable housing data set with housing production data tied to goals set by a mayoral administration. The Affordable Housing Open Data consists of projects that were counted towards the Housing New York Plan, which was under former Mayor Bill de Blasio, and the Housing Our Neighbors Plan, which is under the current Mayor Eric Adams. The open data consists of 2 files, a project level file and a building level file, and we'll get more into that. Internally, the affordable housing data goes through a multi-level review process before it's published as open data. Once an HPD project manager closes a project and enters the required data for that project, the project manager then submits the data for review. The project's data goes through a multi-step review process where the program's director reviews the data and the analytics team also reviews it before it's published. And at any point in the review process, the project can be rejected by a reviewer, which basically signals that there's a need for correction. There are 2 data sets that make up the affordable housing open data. There's a project level file that shows the affordable housing production data at a project level with attributes like project name, the number of affordable units in a project, total units in a project, the number of senior units in the project, and the expected tax incentive the project is slated to get. The building level file includes building level information for a project, including location details, the number of affordable units in a project, and the total units in a project. Project ID, which is a unique identifier, is what links the 2 data. And so another way to think about it is that a project can include 1 or more buildings that are financed as part of the closing transaction. The affordable and the total units represents all the units across all of the buildings that make up that project. The building itself is one singular structure and includes only the units that are part of that building. And the units, of course, are actual houses or apartments that. So some of the fields that you'll find in the projects data set include project ID, which is the unique identifier that I alluded to earlier, project start date, which is the closing date for the project, units by income or AMI, which tells you the number of units at each AMI bucket, rental and homeownership units, senior units, and planned tax benefit, which tells you the tax benefit that the project is expected to. In the buildings data set, you'll find some of the same fields, with the only difference being that the buildings data set gives you the information at a building level. So you'll find project ID, you'll find project start date, you'll find units by income and rental homeownership units. But beyond those similarities, you'll also find fields unique to the buildings data set, including building ID, which is a unique identifier for each building. You'll find other location information. You'll find construction type, which tells you whether the building is a new construction or a preservation, and you'll find the number of units by. And again, what links the 2 data sets together. So one thing that you'll notice in the affordable housing open data is that there are a number of projects that are labeled as confidential. And so these confidential projects fall into 2 categories. So the first is our homeownership assistance projects, and the second is multifamily projects for special populations. Homeowner projects are loans to individual homeowners through HPD's small homeownership programs. Multifamily confidential projects serve special populations like survivors of domestic violence and those living with HIV/AIDS. And for privacy, we remove the building ID, we remove the house number and street name for projects that are confidential. So once you actually start looking at the data in the affordable housing data set, you'll notice a few things. You'll notice that we produce housing all over the 5 boroughs of New York City, but that almost a third of our unit production is in the Bronx, followed by Brooklyn, which has about a quarter of our production, Manhattan, which has another quarter of our production, and finally, Queens and Staten Island. In the Bronx, the biggest project the city has financed in the borough is Co-op City, which has about 15,000 affordable units. In Brooklyn, the biggest project the city has financed in the borough is Start City, which has about 6,000 affordable units. In Manhattan, the biggest project that the city has financed in that borough is Stuytown, which has about 5,000 affordable units. In other boroughs like Staten Island and some parts of Queens, our projects may not be as large because of the type of housing that is characteristic of some of the neighborhoods. For example, in Staten Island, there are a lot of single family or 1 to 4 family homes, and HPD's production in the borough reflects that. When looking at the distribution of our housing across the 5 boroughs, you'll also notice that most of our production is extremely low income, very low income, or low income. In fact, these 3 income tiers that serve New Yorkers at the lowest AMI brackets make up about 83% of our units that we produce. And the remainder of the units, or about 17% of our production, is for moderate and middle income. HPD also created the Affordable Housing Production Map to show the affordable housing open data in map form. On the map, what's clear is that we produce affordable housing all over the city, but that there are certain parts of the city where we see a lot of our production, including in the Bronx, which, if you recall, is where about a third of our production is. Brooklyn, where about a quarter of our production is, and Manhattan, where about another quarter of our production is. Another point of note is that different parts of the city have more of our multifamily housing production versus other parts of the city that might have more single family or 1 to 4. And so accessing the affordable housing open data is very, very easy. Once you're on the city's open data site, which you can get to by just searching for New York City open data, you can type affordable housing, and once you get your search results, you'll see that the top 2 results are our buildings and our projects data set. So for this demonstration, let's click on So this is the affordable housing production by buildings data set. And once you click on it, again, this is what you see. And from here, you can find, obviously, the data set, right, by viewing data. You can export it, you can visualize it, or you can scroll down to under attachments. And this is where you see the documentation for the open data that you can review before you delve into the data. One thing to note is that we try to keep our documentation up to date and make it clear and informative for users. But if you do have questions, you should definitely not hesitate to contact us. We'll provide an email address for that at the end of. If you want additional details on HPD's housing production data, we also have another data set called our Local Law 44 data set, which was required by a 2012 local law that says that HPD must make information about housing development projects that receive city financial assistance available via open data. The Local Law 44 Open Data is a collection of roughly 10 data sets that includes other information, including information on city financial assistance, organizational structures, unit rent, and affordability and wage information. The data set, along with the Affordable Housing Open Data, is yet another example of the very rich data about affordable housing that we have available in open data. And with that, I'll now pass.
Thank you, Habiba. So now we can move to Q&A. Do we have any questions in the chat? Maggie, do we have anything that we should address first?
Yes, so we have one question so far, and I would just encourage other folks to pop your questions in the chat and we'll go through them. So the first question is a great one. I like this question. So it's, can you speak to what tools you rely on to manage and create data? What are your pain points and what tools and processes do you swear by? I'm going to go ahead and turn this question. And sorry, as I read that, I realize it's kind of three questions in one. So Habiba, I'm going to ask you kind of point by point, actually, just to make this a little more clean.
Yeah.
So first, what tools do we rely on? What tools would you say we rely on to make?
So we have an internal CRM system that our project managers enter data in. And from there, in terms of sort of like putting our data together and having it in one central place, we have Oracle Business Intelligence that our agency relies on that has where our affordable housing open, or sorry, not our affordable housing open data, but our just our affordable housing production.
Great. And are there any sort of pain points in preparing this data that would be interesting?
I think one thing I can say is that, you know, in terms of making sure their data is ready to release in open data, we definitely have a process that we follow internally where, you know, we make sure that we have data in a timely manner and we make sure that the data is in as good a shape as possible. So that involves review by multiple parties, including our analytics team, just to make sure, again, that the data is in good shape. But in terms of pain points, I don't know if I can think of one. I don't know, maybe Jess can think of something.
Yeah, I was just gonna, I think one of the challenges in this is there's a lot of people entering in the data. So we've also been trying to upfront kind of think about ways to improve that process and do trainings to try to make people understand kind of the value of what the information that they're inputting into our system. So I think that's one place where I think lots of people who would deal with data might have challenges where, especially if it's entered by others and people from different programs. And then otherwise, I think it's just sort of keeping up to date with some of the different things, you know, as we make changes over time and revisit it. And then one other thing, I think sometimes we kind of bump into some challenges with geocoding. So I would just add.
Yeah, just to chime in on that, because a lot of our buildings are, a lot of the records in our data are buildings that are in the process of being built. Geocoding could be a little challenging for those types of buildings. Great. So building off on this, there's a sort of related question that we might have covered, but I'll just make sure we're responding to it directly. So someone asks, what's the data source for your affordable housing database and are they open to the public? Habiba.
Sure. So internally, we have, you know, sort of call it a CRM tool that we use where our project managers and our development staff, once they actually close a project, they enter the data associated with that project that they closed. And from that system, you know, again, there's like a review process that happens internally, and that data is fed into sort of an Oracle Business Intelligence tool where we manage the data internally before, obviously, it makes its way.
Great, thank you. The next question, I'm going to turn over to Yuki. So the question is, what data sets are available for enforcement actions, open violations, et cetera? So I think this question is about more of our housing maintenance code enforcement work, which has many data sets. I'll let Yuki touch on that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to send a link in the chat. This is kind of our open data, HPD specific open data page. And there's a section called Enforcement and Neighborhood Services. There you will see a lot of code enforcement violations data sets. So the biggest one would be, I think, complaints and violations data sets. So if you go to violations, so these are all derived from 311 data sets. So you can see housing maintenance code violations data set on open data like this. And then we also have complaints data, complaints and problems data. So that's pretty much the overview. We have a lot of enforcement data, so I'll encourage you to check out the website to see what kind of enforcement programs and the data sets related to that are.
Great, thanks, Yuki. We had another question, which was, how do I get to the map that was shown in the presentation? So actually that link that Yuki just shared, the first one, which is the link to HPD's website. We have our own kind of open data landing page that Yuki just described on our website. So on that page, not too far, kind of towards the top, you'll see affordable housing production map. And that's the best way to get to the map that we shared earlier. Next question that I wanted to call out. So someone asked, does HPD keep up with projects that are being made with these data? And if so, are there any gaps in the research being done? I think this could be Habiba or Yuki, probably Habiba first. Do you feel like we have a sense, Habiba, of all the work that's being done with this data, or is it somewhat of a mystery?
The way that people are using the data?
Yeah.
I mean, we get questions from multiple different parties based on usage of the data. So I think in one of the slides, sort of Yuki alluded to journalists being users of our open data. Students are definitely another subset of users of our open data. Other people who work in government in the city are also other users of our data, I would say. So it's readily accessible and used by.
Great, thanks. I'm going to pick up a question that was asked earlier and just go ahead and kind of answer this myself, because I think it's probably a question for a different agency, but it's a great question nonetheless. So the question reads, this is a very specific question, but in my neighborhood, it seems that some multifamily homes have been or are being turned into single family homes. Is this being tracked? So this is a bit of a guess on my part, but my understanding is that changes in occupancy do have to go through the Department of Buildings, NYC Department of Buildings. I'm not immediately aware of whether or not they publish that type of filing in open data or not, but if you want to shoot us an email, we can try to direct you to some folks over there to help answer that question. It's not something we track since it involves the whole of New York City housing and not just sort of HPD's work. It's not something we track. I think that would be more of a Department of Buildings question. Okay, and let's see. Next question, I think is a good one for Habiba. Could you speak to affordable housing production concentration in poorer areas of the city? So Habiba talked about this a bit in the presentation, but kind of, I guess the question is talking a little bit more about why a lot of our housing production happens in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I will say is that we as HPD definitely produce housing all over the city, all over the 5 boroughs. And depending on where in the city you are, our housing may look different, right? So for example, in, southern part of the Bronx, the South Bronx, or in northern Manhattan, we might have housing that is more multifamily, and that serves low-income people, whereas in Staten Island or certain parts of Queens, our housing composition might be more single family or 1 to 4 family homes. And the kind of housing that we produce is also affected by other things, right? So if you think about our preservation portfolio, what also feeds into that is the kind of housing that already exists in particular neighborhoods. Other things that might affect the kind of housing that we produce may be sort of the kind of housing that one can actually build in a particular area. So zoning requirements, but sort of to conclude, I would say that we certainly build housing that's affordable.
Great, thank you. Another question came in that's a pretty simple, straightforward answer, so I'll take that one myself as well. Question is, how often does HPD update the data sets on open data? So they're all different. We have over 40 distinct open data sets, and based on the availability of the data that we have, we set those update schedules. So our code violations, excuse me, let me be more clear, our housing maintenance code violations data set is updated daily. And this data, the two data sets that we really highlighted today are updated quarterly, the affordable housing production data sets. So on each landing page for each of our open data sets, you can see what that frequency is. And we, for the most part, try to stick to those pretty closely, those schedules. Next question, there was a question, excuse me, about supportive housing. So there's a question about, I think it's kind of two-part. How might I find supportive housing development projects and funding streams through HPD Open Data? Habiba or possibly Jess, do you want to try to answer that?
Yeah, so HPD, for supportive housing units, we report that information in aggregate as part of our production data, but sort of at an individual level for individual buildings or individual projects, we don't, certainly not as a part of a data set, release what our supportive housing production is. And this is largely for data.
Next question is, does HPD track the amount of rent stabilization units throughout NYC in open data? I'm going to kick this question to myself again because my team handles this. Rent stabilization and rent control, so what we would call together rent regulated units, those two types of rent regulated units, those are tracked by the state. It's actually a function of the state to do oversight and tracking of those units. And there are many different laws and statutes that actually make that information highly confidential. It's exempted from FOIL and whatnot. And so to the extent that HPD may have some access to that data through the state, it is not data that we own, and it is not data that we would ever be allowed to publish in open data. All right, let's see. This question's a bit long, but I think it's a good one. This is going to be for Habiba. So what does project finished mean in terms of the project cycle you described? For example, is the project physically completed and then the data goes through the release in the open data cycle? There's more, but let's start there. So Habiba, do you want to kind of describe how we think about project completion?
Yeah, absolutely. So project start is basically that we have closed financing on a project, all the legal docs have been signed, there's a reg agreement or a restrictive declaration that has been signed for that project, and that it's kind of ready to start and we can count it as part of our production. It takes, depending on the type of project, it takes a while for some projects to complete. Once a project completes, essentially what that means is that it has the closing documents, right? Or sorry, not the closing documents, that there are completion documents that can certify that this particular project or particular building has reached completion, right? So if it's a new construction project, it might be that we use, a certificate of completion or some other documentation that certifies that a project has reached completion. And essentially what that means is that, construction is done and it has met all of the requirements that can certify that that particular building has reached.
Great, thanks. And then the second half of this question, I think, is trying to get at what is the point at which the project data goes into open data? So do we wait until projects are complete to go into open data, or what? When do they go into the open data set?
Yeah, so the project data that you find in the affordable housing open data is based on the first marker that I talked about, which is the project start. So once a project has started or has, sort of the closing documents are all, good and signed, we consider the project to have started. And we have a bunch of internal processes that we go through. We collect the data, we ready it, and on a quarterly basis, it's released.
Great, thank you. We have a question here about a ProPublica article about an algorithm that's used to drive rents. It looks fascinating, but probably a little bit too complex for us to respond to in real time. But I would encourage you to email us that question, and we'll see if there's any, any information that we can share, any data sets we can point you to. Another question here, do we have data on the type of units produced, e.g. the level of affordability by a specific developer or different types of developers such as nonprofit? Habiba, or again, possibly Jess.
Jess, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take it. So we do not have the development team information in this open data set. During the presentation, Habiba had touched on the local law 44 data set, and that has, so just as a reminder, so local law 44 of 2012, which relates to housing development projects, it very specifically lays out what it means to be a housing development project. That's defined by that law. We don't have a say in that, and then all the different fields that are provided are laid out in that law. So, but that does require us to include the organizational structure. And if you look at that open data, there's I think probably like 11, maybe more data sets related to it. And there is one related to the organizational charts, which would have some of that information. But that's all kind of defined, and there's stuff in the documentation about that could give you a little bit more information, drills down at a.
Great, thanks, Jess. Next question, is supportive housing development considered a confidential project? Habiba.
Yeah, so if you recall, we alluded to what we consider confidential projects. So those are our small homeownership projects, so where individual people live. And obviously we want to protect their information because privacy. The second set of our confidential projects are where special populations, and we define special populations as survivors of domestic violence and those living with.
Great, thank you. There was a question raised, which I think is a great question, but maybe a little bit large in scope for us to tackle right now, and we're not necessarily the best people to answer. But so the question is, what are the equity considerations you have in place for these projects in terms of geographic distribution of affordable housing and meeting the fair housing mandate, et cetera? So I'll go ahead and pop in the chat a link to HPD's Where We Live report that really tackles this topic. And then again, feel free to email us as well, and we can try to connect you with folks.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the questions, and this is really, really helpful for us as well. So we really, really appreciate your questions. This concludes our presentation. And again, thank you for joining today, and really enjoyed presenting this to you all. So please, again, feel free to reach out to us at opendata@hpd.nyc.gov for your questions and suggestions in the future.